All right. I think it's recording, even though I'm getting exactly zero feedback that it is recording. But okay. So what we're going to do is first we'll make the custom cell, and then we'll build out all the stuff where you can tap on it and change settings and blah, 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 blah. Make sense? Cool? Okay. So let's start with our custom cell. And I can do anything with these custom cells. I'm just going to do something really simple, which is just add a second text label to it, so I can put like priority inside of this view here. So instead of just saying whatever the title is, it'll say like the title and the priority. But in theory, you could have an image in here, and that image could be like an unchecked checkbox and then a checked checkbox, right? Or you could have stars that indicate, or some kind of other graphic that's color coded to priority. So you just swap out which graphic you want for what the priority is instead of the word priority and then a number or whatever. But I'm lazy, so I'm going to go ahead and make this easy for me. So right here, I've selected the prototype cell. And you can see over here in the settings for the prototype cell, make sure, by the way, the easiest way I have found to make sure you're selecting the right thing is to use the hierarchy here to select the stuff rather than selecting directly in the storyboard, because it has a tendency to not select the right thing. It's similar to like Illustrator when you're working. It's sometimes easier to select stuff based on the layers. Toolbar, same deal. All right, so I have the cell selected. And you can remember we had basic as what was the one that we had selected here for style. There's all these other kinds of ones, and you can figure out how they work too. But what we're going to do is hit custom. And you should just be warned, this is one of those things that you got to do all these different steps before anything works. So the second that I hit custom, all my code's going to explode, okay? And it's going to explode because this text label that currently says title will no longer exist inside of the cell. And so all the Swift code that's calling it will get the red stop signs and all that kind of stuff. So this is one of those things where you can't do like one thing and test it, one thing and test it, one thing and test it. It's like you got to do 6 things and then test it. Make sense? Cool. Okay. So I'm going to hit custom. That makes an empty cell. If I hit play, it will crash because there's no longer titles in there. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and make a couple labels in there. So I'm going to drag one label in, and I'll make this bigger. And this label will be called, just like I'll call it title, just so I can keep track of it. And then that prototype cell is not looking very big. So what I want to do, because I want to have a bunch of stuff inside of this, so I'm going to make it taller. Now, this is one of those gotchas. You got to do 2 places you have to make the cells taller. The first is the actual cell itself needs to be made taller. And then the space that the table is reserving for the cell has to be increased as well. Okay? You can think of these as like Russian nesting dolls. In order to make everything work right, if you want to make the inner Russian nesting doll bigger, you have to both scale the inner one bigger and the one that holds it has to get bigger in order to contain it. Does that make sense? Okay? Now in real life, if I were to scale the inside one bigger, it would explodify the outer one, right? In this world, if I make this bigger, they'll all just start overlapping with each other and will look weird. All right, so you got to make it bigger in 2 places, both the individual element and the container that's holding it. So to make the individual element bigger here, just go to the little ruler on the cell, and you say, hey, the row height is going to be bigger. So instead of the default height, and you can see it's updating the storyboard to make it look bigger. Or I can click and drag this to make it be bigger as well. It almost doesn't matter how you get there. Whatever you have, let's say it's 111 is what I've gotten to. You can go back. So that's the inner Russian doll. Now I've got to scale the outer one. You go to the table itself, and if you go to the ruler on the table, there's a setting for the row height. And the row height, you just put in whatever value it made the inner one. And so now both the Russian doll, the little Russian doll, and the outer Russian doll are both scaled appropriately. Okay? Next, we'll put another label in here, now that I got some room. And I'll call this one priority. Okay, sweet. So now I have in my prototype cell 2 different things instead of just one. These could be, like I said, you could have graphics in here. You can do all kinds of stuff with this. All kind of fancy stuff. Doesn't really matter what you do, but there you go. Okay? So awesome, awesome, awesome. Next, what we got to do is we're going to make a custom cell in the Swift code. Yeah?
Did you do anything when you selected the table view?
The only thing I did when I selected the table view, right here, is just make sure that row height is set to however big the prototype height was going to be. And you can get to both of those by selecting them and then hitting the little ruler. And I think it's at the top one on both of them. Okay, so now in our storyboard, we've created a custom table view cell. Now we need to go into our Swift code and create a custom table view cell. Now, technically, we can put this Swift custom table view cell in any Swift file in the entire document, okay, in the entire project. I think it's best practice to put it on the same page as the view controller that's going to be using that cell. So this page right here is the task list view controller. So I'm just going to go into the task list view controller. And see how I have this thing that says class and says, hey, I have this custom thing that I call task list view controller, and it is a UI table view controller. See this right here? We've been kind of ignoring that line. It's just saying, hey, there exists a UI table view controller, and it is called task list view controller. This is automagic. The software does this for us, okay? What we're going to do is do the same thing, but we're going to write it ourselves and do that to create a brand new table view cell. So what you're going to want to do is go into that, and then do the same thing, but instead of making a UI table view controller, I'm going to make a custom cell. You can name it whatever you want. I'm going to name it my custom cell because I know that's a nice and non-reserved word. And just like task view controller, you say class and the name of the custom version of that thing and then what it is. So it is a UI table view controller. For my custom cell, I'm going to say what it is. It is a UI table view cell. And then anything inside of here is the instructions for my UI table view cell. Make sense? You with me so far? Okay. So I've created a UI table view cell from the Swift code. Awesome. Now when I switch back to the storyboard, this custom UI table view cell will be available in the storyboard. It wasn't before. So if I go back to the storyboard, if I select my task list view here, and go to my cell, and see this little one that looks kind of like a newspaper right here, or it looks like not a newspaper, but like an ID card. That's the identity inspector. We've already done the thing where we changed the class here for certain things. We're now going to say, hey, this prototype cell is that custom class I just made. You with me? Okay. So in the class there, if I hit the little drop down, it'll now include the new one that we just created. My custom cell is sitting there ready for us.
So right now you selected the table view and then click the newspaper icon.
Yeah, make sure you have my cell selected here. It's got to be my cell because I'm assigning a custom table view cell to my cell. Remember, in theory, this is being recorded, so you can all follow along later if you get lost. But everybody makes sense so far? Okay. Once you've made that connection, so now I have a custom prototype cell over here in the storyboard, and I have the Swift code of a custom class for cells, and then I say, hey, this custom prototype cell over here in the storyboard is that custom class you just made over there. Once I do that, I can now start making connections between the two. So before I did this right here, my custom cell, if I were to try to control drag the title and priority and get that little blue line out, if I were to try to do that into my code, it wouldn't work because it's not allowing me to say like, hey, these things are in this thing because this thing doesn't exist yet that they could go into. But now that they're all tied together, I can make these connections. So I'm going to go ahead and do the split screen thing. And so now I can take my title, control drag out, and I can drop it into my new custom cell. And I can say like the title. And then I can get to priority and control drag it out and say the priority. Sweet. My work now is done with the storyboard. I can go ahead and put the storyboard away. And so now whenever I use my custom cell, instead of just there being one text box inside of it that was that title that came along with the basic setting, I now have two text boxes inside of it, two labels. And so down here, when I go into each cell and say, hey, change the text label, its text to whatever the task is, there's no such thing as text label anymore. It's now one of these two labels. So I'm going to use the title, copy, paste. And so now the title is being set with the task name. And then I can do the same thing for the priority. We got an error, but don't worry about it. We'll get back to that in a second. So now the priority will go into the priority text, and the title of the task will go inside of the task name area. Here's a problem. Okay? Yeah. You have a question? What's that? Bigger font. I know you'd think I'd remember what the. There we go. Let me make some room because we're going to need some horizontal space. Okay. So right now, in line 32, we're just using a kind of default standard issue cell. But when it's creating this here, where it's making a copy of my cell. But it isn't a default standard issue cell anymore. It's my brand new cell called my custom cell. So what I need to do is say, hey, don't just make a generic cell right here. Make a generic cell and treat it as if it's my custom cell. So what I'm going to do here is, just like we had to take the data stream out of the user defaults and cast it into something else. So we're going to say, hey, it's no longer this collection of crap. It's now an array of these things. We use the word as. So take this thing and treat it as this. We're doing that. We're going to do the same thing here in line 32. So instead of taking a generic cell, take this generic cell that I've now created and treat it as if it's my custom cell. And it's really simple. Let's do this. As my custom cell. And what don't you like? Yeah, okay. Standard little exclamation point fix here and there. It's not going to like this. Probably saying kind of question marks and yep. There's a very good reason why that it's giving me these error messages. Don't worry about what they are. Oh, and now it's giving me a great error message. I know what's wrong here. In line 35, remember we had set priority as ints. We just need to convert those ints into strings so they can display inside of a label. So just convert that into a string. And now we should be good to go. Yeah, I think that's all X number of steps. We'll hit go and see if I'm right. Sweet, I am. So here's all my tasks that I had recorded on Tuesday with each priority underneath them showing up. I don't know about you, but that's pretty awesome. Okay, and it still works with the other stuff. So if I go to the bottom of the list, so you can say wake up to alarm clock is the last task that I had written for myself. I'm now going to make a new one called like, what do you do after you do that? You brush your teeth. And that's a high priority. Save it, go back, it refreshes that list, and so now when I go to the bottom of this list, brush teeth is there. Sweet. Everything works as expected.
Wait, what did you have to add here to get it to not have the,
What was the question?
You have to add some.
what was like the extra code that you had to add to make it not have the red? What was the thing that I had?
hit the X, the stop signs, and they should tell you what's wrong.
Oh.
Fix.
Yeah.
Just remember, there's kind of a handful of important pieces, so let's make sure we get all the pieces. The first important piece is we have to go into the storyboard to start with and change it from being basic to custom. Then we gotta customize it, put text labels in, put images in, whatever you're gonna do all that work inside of the storyboard to get everything ready. If you need to make the height different, remember you gotta change the height in two different places, both the actual element's height and the containing block's height. So that's changing both the individual prototype cell and the amount of space being reserved in the table for each row. And both of those are, you select them and hit the little ruler and crank up their heights to make them equal. Then over in your Swift code, you have to create a custom UI table view cell. It doesn't matter what you name it. Just name it something memorable and a non-reserved word, so you can't use a word that's part of the Swift programming language. Then switch back to your storyboard and change the custom prototype cell to change its class to whatever it is that you had named it in the Swift code. Then dual screen it and control drag elements out of the storyboard, like your title, your priority, your images, whatever it's going to be. Control drag them over to the Swift code and give them names. That's what we have right here. Then go down to the code in the table view where you're creating the cells, and you're doing two major things inside of that. The first is line 32. Instead of generating a generic table view cell, you're going to use as exclamation point and then the name of the custom cell that you had typed in above. So you're saying treat this generic cell as this specific type of cell, and then that will give you access to that cell's custom stuff, which is what 34 and 35 are, which is the title and the priority, or that could be an image or whatever it is. And then spit out your custom cell in line 37. And inevitably, you'll have a couple random question marks and exclamation points in the wrong places. You'll get red stop signs. You hit that, and you hit fix, and you go fix, 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 and then you're ready to rock. Cool? Make sense? Conceptually, does it all make sense? All those pieces all fit together? Sweet. Awesome. I'm going to stop this recording and make another one for the other piece.